Journalist and documentarian Antony Loewenstein joins us now from Sydney with more analysis on this. So we see this as yet another challenge, and this time a serious one to Netanyahu, who's been such a survivor for all of these years. But these are rather strange bedfellows, aren't they, to finally see Netanyahu out the door, the ultra-nationalist and the centrist former television host.
You know, one of the challenges that many Israel supporters have said for years is that Netanyahu apparently gave Israel a bad name. He was gruff, he was far too close to Donald Trump, so they said. And a lot of supporters of Israel in the West are hoping for a more palatable leader. Well, Naftali Bennett is exactly the opposite of what they would want. I mean, the issues that Israel has internationally, and we saw this in the recent conflict between Israel and Gaza, is not a question of PR, it's a question of policy. And you're right, the coalition that Bennett seems to have formed is an unorthodox one. Whether it lasts, Israeli history with coalitions is one that generally suggests that coalitions don't last very long. But ultimately, the policies don't change, as your previous speakers have said. And this presents a real problem, putting aside the Palestinians, of course, who know that their lives will not improve. It poses a problem for internationals, not just image, but its reputation and also its support. Without global international support from the Jewish community, from Democrats, from Republicans, Israel's got a major problem on its hands. And ultimately, you see that, I think, with Bennett, is not going to change that problem.
Right, so many are shocked by seeing Bennett poised now to take power, and this looks like this coalition is going to happen. But you have to emphasize that word coalition. So when you team this guy, Bennett, up with a centrist like Lapid, what do you see this coalition actually looking like in terms of policy?
Well, on the issue that matters the most, which is the occupation, it's the longest occupation, obviously, in modern times, and I would slightly challenge your view that Lapid is a centrist. He has framed himself as a centrist of sorts, but ultimately he is on the occupation, frankly, just as right-wing as Bennett or Netanyahu. The sad reality of Israeli political life in the last really decades is that there's virtually no difference between any of the senior major political leaders on this question. Yes, there are differences on other issues around Israel, to be sure, but on the occupation, the issue that matters, frankly, the most, including, of course, the Palestinians, 5 million of whom are under occupation in the West Bank and Gaza, there is no difference. Lapid and Bennett are virtually the same as Netanyahu. And I think what Israel's going to find with a new leader or deputy leader is that the way Israel is viewed internationally will not change. The fact that, for example, a few months ago, Human Rights Watch puts out a report saying that what Israel is doing is committing apartheid, that doesn't change with a new leader. In fact, this new leader thinks that apartheid should be deepened, not reduced. So, yes, it's an interesting new mix, but ultimately for people who care about what's happening in Palestine and Israel itself, little will change to those who are suffering.
What about Netanyahu's status? Let's say he leaves office. He's already on trial for corruption charges. He's no longer protected under office, is he? What could we see there?
Well, he's scared. I mean, there's no doubt that there's been, as your viewers will be aware, 4 elections in the last 2 years. And he never actually won those elections, but the other side could never form a coalition. So therefore, he just kind of stayed in the office of Prime Minister by default. He's worried that he will have to continue facing trial. He may well face jail time. That is a real possibility. In fact, Israel has a quite inglorious history of many former Israeli prime ministers and indeed presidents going to jail for everything from rape to corruption. Now, whether he actually serves jail time, of course, is impossible to say, but the charges against him are pretty serious. And I think one of the things that he would worry about is that he has so divided Israeli society, let alone the Palestinians, that his support base actually is remarkably slim. He has ultra-Orthodox who support him, and indeed the far right, the racist groups who are coalitioned with him. But aside from that, a lot of people, I think, regard him as causing more trouble than he's worth, even though the other sides could not form a coalition for the last 2 years. But he's scared, is the bottom line, and his family, in fact, are concerned that he may face a pretty inglorious near future.
Thanks for that analysis, Antony.